Every foot of ground and every last inch of civilization is worth defending with your life. Our own fight for the West does not begin on the battlefield. It begins with our minds, our wills, and our souls. Our freedom, our civilization, and our survival depend on these bonds of history, culture, and memory. And today as ever, Poland is in our heart, and its people are in that fight. Just as Poland could not be broken, I declare today for the world to hear that the West will never, ever be broken. Our values will prevail. Our people will thrive. And our civilization will triumph.
Now, when I listen to the speech, I keep thinking, what does a typical social justice warrior hear? All this stuff about civilization, the West's freedom, it's everything the modern left despises. And that part about defending with your life, it must sound like a foreign language to people who think pronouns trump patriotism. So it's no wonder the very liberal Vox writer Sarah Wildman said the speech sounded like an alt-right manifesto because it mentioned family and country. That's how normal stuff is viewed these days. It's got to be weird for leftists to hear a man championing the right to pursue a better life, free from pernicious ideologies that seek to limit freedom, that seek to punish you. It must be hard for the left to hear that when they champion Women's March organizer Linda Sarsour, who says stuff like this.
I hope that when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad, that we are struggling against tyrants and rulers, not only abroad in the Middle East or in the other side of the world, but here in these United States of America, where you have fascists and white supremacists and Islamophobes reigning in the White House.
Yeah. If that's a role model, then all this freedom talk must be sickening. To them, hearing a leader talk about those in the past who died to protect an idea, not an identity, how patriotism matters, not just pigment, I guess that's got to be gross. And to see the Polish cheering this message and this man, a man despised by coddled undergrads who think a nipple ring is an achievement. It must be weird for the ones who slowly realize that maybe this guy makes sense, but they can't admit it because it's Donald Trump. It might not hurt to read his speech in a quiet room, divorced from the voice you think you hate. You might learn that personal freedom is about safe spaces for everyone, not just you. So, Dana, it sounded like an alt-right manifesto. Technically, then all of our ancestors who fought in World War II are alt-right.
Right. And it is interesting to look at everybody's different perspective. But I do think a lot on the left had a preconceived notion of what the speech would be, and they were going to say this no matter what the words were.
Yeah.
So they didn't actually listen to the speech, because at this point they're beyond listening. They're just wanting to spew it out. But one of the things I liked about what President Trump was talking about is how you shouldn't underestimate an ideology, which is what happened with Nazism over time. And what he was talking about is ISIS. And not just ISIS, but about radical Islamic terrorism and how underestimating it can lead to really dire consequences. And so you have to hit it head on. Yeah. Jesse, could a typical kid brainwashed in leftist politics even begin to understand this speech?
I think you can if you read the script.
Yes.
I did that. I read the actual text, and it's totally different. This was a celebration of Western civilization.
Yeah.
It was a warning against encroaching socialism, and it all starts with borders. This was a celebration of borders. If you're a Polish citizen and your country has been invaded and your borders have been erased, it's still your land, Donald Trump was saying. And from that land comes culture and comes history and comes pride. And I think that's something worthy to celebrate. But it was also about freedom and God, which the left hates. And I said this before, he ties in America's arc of history with Poland's arc of history, fighting the Nazis and the communists and all those oppressive people. But the commonality is the belief in God. And I think that's something that's very important. And then he tied it all together and he says, these are the goals of the West. Our goal is to defeat and destroy ISIS. Our goal is to defend our civilization. And then he did this kind of nifty pivot where he tied it into draining the swamp. Yeah. And he says these rules and regulations, you know, it's not about that. And it's not about the powerful, it's about the people. And he brought himself down to the streets. And we talked about that just a moment ago. And I think that's where he really connected. And you heard those chants, Donald Trump, Donald Trump.
Yeah, Juan, I think a Democrat could have made that speech 40 or 50 years ago, right?
Yeah, different time. I mean, the thing about this is, the first thing I want to say is, don't forget, this is a pro-Duda crowd out there. I don't know that this crowd represents all of Poland. This was a crowd put together by...
Was it Lech there, though? Lech Walesa, who was there?
I don't know.
He was on the stage, I'm pretty sure.
But I'm telling you, this is a crowd that was assembled by a hardline Polish leader.
So Polish
and
citizens
they're standing there, and they're yelling stuff like fake news, fake news. What do you think? They're being pumped up to perform for Donald Trump.
That never happened with Obama.
But the
I don't think that's giving the Polish people much credit. You're making them sound like they're puppets.
I'm telling you what took place. But I'm going to say I don't understand why he would go overseas and make a speech of the kind you described, which is, if you want to say, hey, in America, we need to be stronger, we need to understand our values, because, Jesse, guess what? I'm a Democrat, and I'm a deep believer in God and Jesus, and I love liberty, and I love this country.
Well, I don't think there's anything divisive that President Trump said today when he talked about the love of God.
Excuse me, when he is speaking overseas, and he talks about America first and ethnocentricity in the way that he did, I think it strikes world leaders, because he's not speaking to an American audience. He's speaking to the world as, oh, America's pulling back, and America's going to look out for America, and forget about the global alliance.
Hey, G, can you respond to Juan?
He never said that today.
He's claiming it was ethnocentric.
Yeah, I don't think it was ethnocentric at all. And in fact, again, just if you read the transcript, you actually look at what the president said instead of selectively kind of editing and what you think that he said and trying to, like, change it up. One of the things I thought that was most powerful was the prerequisite for the success of Western civilization is not material riches, economic prosperity, and military might on their own are not sufficient. Then he goes on to discuss about the confidence in core Western values such as free speech, the equality of women, respect for individual rights, the rule of law, and the affirmation of faith and family. That should have been fine for the left, and it should be really well accepted for people of faith and people of religious background, be it Democrat or Republican.
Well, when he's going after the intelligence agencies and the news media, I think, boy, Vladimir Putin, he must think, gosh, this is great.
Especially when he then criticized Vladimir Putin pretty strongly. We'll talk about that later, though, America.
Earlier today, President Trump was in Poland. Let's take a look.
We've come to your nation to deliver a very important message. America loves Poland, and America loves the Polish people. I am here today not just to visit an old ally, but to hold it up as an example for others who seek freedom and who wish to summon the courage and the will to defend our civilization. What CNN did was unfortunate for them. As you know now, they have some pretty serious problems. We want to see fair press. I think it's a very important thing. We don't want fake news. We urge Russia to cease its destabilizing activities in Ukraine and elsewhere, and its support for hostile regimes, including Syria and Iran. Not only must we secure our nations from the threat of terrorism, but we must also confront the threat from North Korea. I don't draw red lines. President Obama drew a red line, and I was the one that made it look a little bit better than it was. They are behaving in a very, very dangerous manner, and something will have to be done about it. And I declare today for the world to hear that the West will never, ever be broken. Our values will prevail. Our people will thrive, and our civilization will triumph.
Joining us now for reaction is Vice President Mike Pence, who's keeping the home fires burning. Had a great trip today to examine our space program. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Vice President Pence, it was an unbelievable day. It was unreal on so many levels. Poland, what Poland represents to freedom and Eastern Europe. But it is incredible to me, after seeing how optimistic that speech was, to watch the commentary afterward. Washington Post calling it dark and provocative. He says we will not be broken, but it's dark and provocative, Vice President Pence. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think what the world saw today is what we see every day in this president, and that is unapologetic American leadership. I mean, it really is remarkable to think for the last 8 years we had an administration that was more often than not apologizing for America around the world, boasting about leading from behind. And today in Warsaw, Poland, with those eloquent words that your viewers just heard again, President Donald Trump reaffirmed our nation's commitment to be the leader of the free world. And I have to tell you, having been in Florida today at the Kennedy Space Center, talking with folks down there, the enthusiasm for seeing the kind of leadership that President Trump is demonstrating at home and abroad, and even the leadership he wants to bring to our commitment to space, I think is invigorating the American spirit all across this country.
He was criticized for attacking President Obama for not doing more to redress the Russian meddling. He was criticized for attacking the press in a country where a lot of people think, you know, the free press is endangered. He was attacked in the media for also criticizing our intelligence community. Would you have gone to Europe and criticized President Obama? Would you?
Well, look, this president is always going to favor the media and the public with candor. And in the press conference that took place earlier today, he responded to those questions. But I think looking at that speech in that historic square in Warsaw, you saw the president lay out a vision for the West, in his words, a commitment of will that will never back down to the shared values that we in this transatlantic alliance have now shared for more than 75 years. And to hear his reaffirmation of our commitment to NATO, of Article 5, to hear him call on our NATO allies to continue to live up to the commitments they've made to our common defense, and in the same breath to call on Russia the day before his meeting with President Putin to cease their activities, to cease supporting hostile regimes. I just have to tell you, for me, it was an example of the kind of bracing and direct and candid leadership that people across this country welcome in this president. And frankly, as I hear in leaders around the world, they are welcoming a president of the United States who's embracing his role as leader of the free world. In a very real sense, under President Trump, America is back.
He's had a frosty relationship with Merkel and clearly Macron. I mean, they're playing to their home crowd as well. But it was announced today that the EU and Japan are forging a new trade deal, and they're using that as leverage against what they see as a president of the United States who's not as friendly to trade. So are they trying to box the United States in to say, look, you guys want to, deep six TPP and TTIP and all these other agreements? Well, we'll do the same to you. We'll box you out. So they're having their own reaction.
Well, what the world understands is that President Trump is going to put America first in diplomatic terms and in economic terms. He's put the world on notice that these lopsided trade deals that have been negotiated by multiple past administrations are just unacceptable. America's open for business, but we want win-win trade relationships. And I think you're seeing the world respond to that. Very good discussions with President Moon, who I know he saw again today in Hamburg, but we greeted him in our nation's capital in the last week. We're talking about beginning to discuss amendments and a renegotiation of our trade agreement with South Korea.
Well, what about President Obama?
He's put China on notice about our trade relationship. And what you see here is a president that's saying, look, we want to engage the world, but we want to engage the world by putting the interests of American workers, American jobs, and American sovereignty first.
Now, and what about President Obama then, talking to the president of South Korea after that historic meeting in Washington? It seemed like we were having another presidential side discussion about trade or about other things. I found that to be unusual, to say the least. Certainly President Bush never did anything like that.
Well, we've been hearing a lot from former President Obama, and I'll leave people to be their own judge of that. What I saw in the meeting with President Moon at the White House was a lot of candor, a lot of direct engagement, and a renewal of our strategic commitment to that country. And I just have to tell you, I traveled Southeast Asia. I was in Europe myself representing the president earlier this year. And what I keep hearing from leaders around the world is how grateful they are that America is leading again on the world stage. And I think whether it was the speech in Saudi Arabia a few weeks back, whether it was that historic speech today in Warsaw, leaders around the world, while we may have our differences, I think welcome a president of the United States who's committed to embracing that role to be the leader of the free world.
A weak America leads to a dangerous world. Vice President Pence, it's always great to see you. Thank you for joining us and what you're doing for the National Space Council. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura.
And
we have to remember that our defense is not just a commitment of money. It is a commitment of will. Because as the Polish experience reminds us, the defense of the West ultimately rests not only on means, but also on the will of its people to prevail and be successful and get what you have to have. The fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. Do we have the confidence in our values to defend them at any cost? Do we have enough respect for our citizens to protect our borders? Do we have the desire and the courage to preserve our civilization in the face of those who would subvert and destroy it?
Joining us now is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Understanding Trump, former Speaker of the House, Fox News contributor, Newt Gingrich. Newt, I'm so glad you're here because when I first saw him speak today in Poland, the only thing in my mind that came close is Ronald Reagan. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump is Ronald Reagan. I'm not saying it's the same historical moment. I'm not saying any of that. But I thought the speech both captured an optimistic tone, it was a challenging tone, hopeful and faith-based as well, which we're going to get into in a moment. But did you get a little bit of Reagan in what he was saying there?
No, I thought it was very much like Reagan's 1982 speech at Westminster, which is one of his best speeches. Trump is describing in a way almost no American president has since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that this is a war about civilization, that we are in a struggle. And I thought he was particularly courageous in pointing out that not only are we in a struggle with Islamic terrorists, we're also in a struggle with bureaucratic secularists, such as the British court that basically wants to kill Charlie Gard, the little baby that they do not want to allow to go and have any kind of help either at the Vatican or in the United States. So I thought the really remarkable speech covered an extraordinary amount of history, and I think that it's a landmark. I think people will be able to see philosophically a lot better who Donald Trump is from this speech. And I think from the standpoint of the Polish people, it was enormously heartening to have an American president so decisively with them and so openly tough about communism and about Russia.
And hearkening back to Reagan, the evil empire speech, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. We have an enemy and those that seek to vanquish freedom. There was this moment from President Trump and the shared interest we have in defeating the terrorists. Let's listen.
We must stand united against these shared enemies to strip them of their territory and their funding and their networks and any form of ideological support that they may have. While we will always welcome new citizens who share our values and love our people, our borders will always be closed to terrorism and extremism of any kind.
Newt, I was wishing that the audience was mic'd up better because the audience was going nuts. There were many parts they were cheering for Donald Trump, but in that moment, they're feeling the criticism, the brunt of the criticism they're getting now from Merkel and other European elites for not taking in more of the refugees. And they're saying, no, we're not doing this. We're not doing what you're doing. And Donald Trump clearly gave support for their vision of protecting their own sovereignty and their own borders, and also, of course, fighting the common interests, common enemies.
Well, you know, there's a huge gap between the values of the Central Europeans, which includes not just Poland, but Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, a number of countries, and the values of Germany and the Scandinavian countries and the Netherlands and France. And I think what Trump has done is come down decisively on the side of those who worry about national identity, worry about survival, have been very practical. And, of course, he set the stage for the meeting in Hamburg, and he indicated clearly to Merkel he ain't backing down. So it'll be very interesting to see how that works.
Angela Merkel, speaking of the German chancellor today, talked about how the strength of Europe, the strength and successes of Europe and the rest of the world depends on open societies. Clearly, that was a nudge at what the elites believe is a increasingly isolationist United States. But I didn't hear that, Newt, in the speech where he reaffirmed our commitment to Article 5, NATO, and reasserted our belief in the important alliances that we have with our European counterparts. But Merkel felt the need to push the open societies line today.
Well, you know, there was a real strain coming out of World War II, having faced the horrors of World War I, then the horrors of Nazism, then the horrors of World War II. There was a real strain that said the only way to avoid war is to submerge our national identities to basically all become Europeans. Well, it's turned out not to be a very good deal because the bureaucrats in Brussels represent a secular worldview which is fundamentally at odds, for example, with the Catholicism of the Polish people. And so I think what you're seeing is a real struggle between local nations and this kind of globalism that Chancellor Merkel represents.
Yeah, the global secularists versus the traditionalists. And speaking of faith and what this meant to the Polish people today, we're going to talk about more of that with Newt Gingrich right after the break. And
President Trump didn't just defend Western civilization during his visit to Poland today. During a joint news conference with the Polish president, Trump criticized CNN for hounding that anonymous Reddit user who had the gall to create an anti-CNN GIF featuring the president.
What CNN did was unfortunate for them. As you know now, they have some pretty serious problems. They have been fake news for a long time. They've been covering me in a very, very dishonest way. What CNN and others, I mean, not others, NBC is equally as bad, despite the fact that I made them a fortune with The Apprentice, but they forgot that. But I will say that CNN has really taken it too seriously, and I think they've hurt themselves very badly, very, very badly.
Whoa! Well, as you can imagine, that led the newscast and lots of other channels today, overpaid cable anchors, calling it, in effect, unpatriotic to criticize them while being on foreign soil. Watch.
American presidents traveling abroad typically uphold American values such as press freedom and the institution of the presidency. Mr. Trump, for his own reasons, did not.
He got savaged for attacks against some people in the media. It does not help his poll numbers.
His media comments of a piece with everything he said before, but the timing of it on foreign soil before a summit in a region of the world where the question of press freedom is still a really important one. No other president in our lifetime probably ever would say such a thing.
You couldn't make it up. Joe Concha follows this stuff for a living. He writes about media for The Hill, and he joins us now. So now, Joe, it's unpatriotic. By the way, the president, we opened with this. I'm not a reflexive defender of the guy, but he just gave a speech defending Western civilization and freedom of expression. But now the press is telling us it's unpatriotic for him to criticize them. How does that work? I thought it was unpatriotic to criticize soldiers on foreign soil, but now cable anchors are in the same category? How does this work?
How does it work? It works in a way of selective outrage, Tucker, because I don't know if you saw Maxine Waters' tweet that came out just a couple hours ago. She said about Donald Trump, our president on foreign soil with foreign leaders, all right, because apparently this is against the rules as well. Only a weak and impotent leader would spend more time attacking his predecessor in the free press than those in the world truly threatening us. So then I looked at the Twitter feeds of all the people you just played, and no one seems to be condemning Ms. Waters for making that mistake of criticizing a president while he's overseas. So until I see that, this is the definition of selective outrage, and it's phony.
But is this a long-standing tradition that you don't criticize cable anchors when you're outside of American borders? I mean, is that an assault on our flag and our history, do you think?
I don't believe so. I believe that is Trump exercising his First Amendment right. And he was asked a question from a reporter about that CNN situation yesterday. You talked about it on your show with Mark Stein. That was a very colorful conversation, particularly the horse in the bed thing from The Godfather. I like that. As far as CNN tracking down an anonymous troll who created a Twitter meme, a wrestling meme of Trump wrestling a logo to the ground. It's so silly and so preposterous, no one would take it seriously. And then the network actually threatening to expose this person if he acted inappropriately on the internet ever again. That's called doxing. That was something that was condemned by the left and the right. And CNN, it was just another self-inflicted wound that the president was addressing during a press conference where he was asked a question and he gave an answer. Is he a traditional president? No. But you ask a question, you give an answer. That's how it works.
You know, my unsolicited editorial is you get a lot out of laughing at things once in a while. Like, you can't be outraged all the time about everything. It's not a good look. So what's going on? You're a media reporter. You follow this stuff carefully. CNN has had an awful lot of crises in the past few weeks. Is there any indication that the people who run the place are looking within and saying, you know, maybe we didn't make all the mistakes we're accused of, but we made some and we're going to fix them? Is there any sense of that?
I don't see that in terms of the public comments, in terms of the Twitter feeds of some of the on-air personalities and the network president. They seem to be playing the card that they are the victims here, that Donald Trump, the president, is bullying them, that conservative media is bullying them, and they don't seem to be acknowledging the myriad of mistakes that they have made. And I would say this is the worst stretch in the 37-year history of CNN. Just think of the aggregate for a second, Tucker. You had two major retractions in June, one of which involving Anthony Scaramucci, who is a Trump ally, that led to 3 resignations of highly decorated reporters. You had Kathy Griffin holding up the fake severed head of Donald Trump that led to her getting fired from the network's New Year's Eve coverage. You had Reza Islan, who was a host, who was fired because he called the president a POS. You had producers caught on camera in undercover videos talking about how the narrative in Russia is mostly BS and that American voters are stupid. And then obviously the July 4th situation with the Reddit troll that they said they would expose if he acted inappropriately. All of these things in aggregate, Tucker, is horrible. And then today you had Chris Cillizza, who is their political editor-at-large, who actually put up a video, a 2-second video, that appeared to show Donald Trump being blown off by the Polish First Lady. Except that if you watch that video for 4 more seconds, and by the way, Cillizza says, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," on his Twitter feed in all caps. If you watch the whole thing, as you see there, of course she shakes President Trump's hand. She went to Melania Trump first, and she shook Donald Trump's hand again. And yet you have Chris Cillizza, who is an important person there, not understanding that there is so much scrutiny around this network right now that when you put out fake videos like that with false editing, it only leads to the perception that CNN is the opposition party. And that is why when a Harvard study comes out, 93% of their coverage of the Trump administration is negative. This only feeds into the narrative that CNN is not acting like the impartial, objective network they claim to be.
That's, you know, I still have friends there. I think they're dying. This is so embarrassing for them.
It's got to be tough, right? It's a tough business, and for this to happen on a daily basis where your network's called out, I couldn't imagine what it's like. Because unless you're on air, you don't get paid a lot, and the hours stink, and you work weekends, and then just to see your network get bashed for your hard work, I feel sorry for some of the producers I know over there as well.
And run like a political campaign, not a journalism organization. It's very sad. Joe, thanks you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Well, in Poland today, President Trump acknowledged that the government of Russia may have meddled in last fall's election, but they likely weren't the only country that did. Watch.
I think it
Could very well have been Russia, but I think it could well have been other countries, and I won't be specific, but I think a lot of people interfere.
So that was one of the first questions he got. This Russia thing has gone on for months and months and months. Innuendo from the press and the Democratic Party, all of whom have demanded and gotten major investigations of every Trump associate for every conceivable tie to Vladimir Putin's government. Given that, the question is, why is almost everybody ignoring possible Russia connections on Hillary Clinton's team? Apparently they're real. Peter Schweitzer is the author of the book Clinton Cash. He just wrote a new op-ed pointing out the complex relationship between the Clinton campaign manager, John Podesta, and the government of Russia. Peter Schweitzer joins us tonight. So, Peter, you know, as a daily newspaper reader, I haven't read much about this. Give us an outline of what we know.
Yeah, very few people have covered this. We first reported it back in July, and there's new information that's come out. In January of 2011, when John Podesta is advising Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State as part of a foreign policy advisory board, advising her on personnel matters, speeches, policy, he joins the board of a Boston-based energy company called Juul Energy. 2 months after he joins the board, the Russian government, in the form of a sovereign wealth fund controlled by Vladimir Putin, this is a fund called Putin's Child by Russia's science minister, they invest $35 million into this company. It's a big investment. The company at this point had only raised $110 million. They get board seats, they get memberships on those executive committees, and John Podesta gets 75,000 shares of stock in this company. When he goes and joins the Obama administration in the White House as a senior counselor, he transfers those shares to his kids. But he continues to receive emails updating him on what Juul's doing and even helping them make decisions. So here you have a situation where John Podesta has a commercial relationship directly with the Russian government. There are 2 Russians that are sitting on the board of this company along with him while he is advising Hillary Clinton on the Russian reset and other issues.
Now, just 2 quick questions. Is he allowed to do this from his perch in the federal government or orchestrate decision-making for the company?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Tucker. He was a official advisor, but not on the State Department payroll when he was with Hillary Clinton.
Okay.
When he joined the Obama White House, he transferred those shares because he could not hold those shares. The problem is that he says that he fully divested from them, but the emails that came out through WikiLeaks indicates that he was still making decisions on the part of those shares that he owned. His kids were not involved in the decision-making process. That's a problem.
Very quickly, is there any reason the government of Vladimir Putin would have an interest in this specific energy company?
Absolutely. It has all kinds of applications, commercial and potentially military. The purpose of this Rusnano fund was to create jobs in Russia, and the $35 million that this company received was ostensibly given to the company, or the investment was made to create a manufacturing facility in Russia itself. That factory, for some reason, was never built, and it's unclear what happened to that $35 million. But yes, the kind of biofuels that they were developing definitely had military application, and this commercial relationship between Putin and Podesta is taking place during the Russian reset with all kinds of tech transfer going on.
Amazing. I'm not alleging anything, but I'm glad to know that. Peter Schweitzer, thanks a lot for that. Appreciate it. Now, speeches like this are always an occasion for a president to say nice things about the country he's visiting, and President Trump did that. But then he went on to do something unusual. He offered a spirited defense of Western civilization from those who seek its destruction. And who exactly would destroy it? Well, radical Islam, of course, ISIS, brain-dead jihadis, and crazy people with bombs. They are a danger to us, the president explained. But they're hardly the whole problem. Maybe the gravest threat we face comes from within. The president put it this way.
We must work together to confront forces, whether they come from inside or out, from the south or the east, that threaten over time to undermine these values and to erase the bonds of culture, faith, and tradition that make us who we are. If left unchecked, these forces will undermine our courage, sap our spirit, and weaken our will to defend ourselves and our societies.
Undermine our courage, sap our spirit. ISIS isn't doing that to us. Our elites are. When they tell us to hate ourselves and our culture and our history, when they teach our children to despise the country that produced them, when they claim that a percentage point of annual economic growth is more important than the bonds that connect us to each other. America isn't falling to foreign invaders. It is rotting from within because the people in charge don't think it's worth preserving. You have to love a civilization in order to save it, and they don't. Well, in 141 of the crispest, truest words he has ever spoken, the president reminded the world why the West is worth defending.
We are the fastest and the greatest community. There is nothing like our community of nations. The world has never known anything like our community of nations. We write symphonies. We pursue innovation. We celebrate our ancient heroes, embrace our timeless traditions and customs, and always seek to explore and discover brand new frontiers. We reward brilliance. We strive for excellence and cherish inspiring works of art that honor God. We treasure the rule of law and protect the right to free speech and free expression. We empower women as pillars of our society and of our success. We put faith and family, not government and bureaucracy, at the center of our lives, and we debate everything. We challenge everything. We seek to know everything so that we can better know ourselves. And above all, we value the dignity of every human life, protect the rights of every person, and share the hope of every soul to live in freedom.
We don't hear it that much, but all of that is true. We are different from other societies. We speak freely. We protect the individual. We do write symphonies. We have no reason to be ashamed. We've got a lot of reasons, countless reasons, to be proud, and not just of our wealth. A civilization is not merely the sum of a country's GDP. It's a constellation of values and norms and traditions, heroes and villains, and yes, even religious beliefs. Ours is the most successful and benevolent in human history, but it's still vulnerable. All civilizations are vulnerable. Rome looked invincible at one point, too. It turned out not to be. So it's worth remembering the basics. Western civilization is our birthright. It makes all good things possible. Undefended, it collapses. And so we've got to fight to preserve it, not just with airstrikes, but with a vigorous defense of our common values. Nothing matters more than that. President Trump has his flaws, but to his everlasting credit, he is willing to say all of that out loud, and that's worth something, maybe a lot.